Good afternoon. I'm Francis Levy. Ed Nersessian and I are co-directors of the Philoctetes Center, and welcome to the Inventions of Bob Dylan. Before we begin today's panel, I want to just make a few announcements and call your attention to the art on the walls. And this is an exhibit, the Aesthetics and Mathematics exhibit that Hallie Cohen, our curator, and Adam Ludwig have put together. People who come into Philoctetes sometimes think that the art on the walls is decorative, but it's always related to one of the programs we're doing, and we've just completed our math series, which was funded by the Templeton Foundation. Yesterday's was Math and Beauty, and we had Brian Greene and Elaine Scarry from Harvard, amongst others. It was an amazing panel, and it's sort of what Philoctetes, the whole weekend is kind of what Philoctetes is about, because we had math yesterday, and we have Bob Dylan today, and my prediction that it was going to get very statistical about Bob Dylan, and yesterday it was very musical about math, actually. So, but I'm not sure.
Bob Dylan has said that he writes mathematical music, so there you are.
My prediction is correct. In other announcements, so I did want to say about this exhibit, that if you'll note that the head on the wall outside by Sarah Ferguson she was a former mathematician, and those are real equations. Harish Lavani employs algorithms. Devin Powers, you'll see, works with symmetry. And Joan Waltermouth uses Fibonacci-type sequences. So the art is all infused with the mathematical ideas that we've been prosecuting in these past incredibly wonderful roundtables. And what I did mean to say was it's also indicative. Well, this has been kind of a litmus test of human intellect, the whole Philoctetes project, because things that we thought wouldn't attract crowds have attracted massive crowds. And we didn't have enough room yesterday for all the people who wanted to hear about mathematics. We were filled up here, and we had 50 people downstairs. This Tuesday, we are having Daniel Mendelsohn, one of my favorite writers on poetry and classics, from Bard, talking about C.P. Cavafy. So if you're interested in any of those subjects, please come. Our jazz program continues on Saturday, November 21st, with soprano saxophonist Jane Ira Bloom riffing her way into the subject of close-up jazz. She's an amazing musician and thinker about jazz, and those of you who haven't heard her, please come, and it's part of our jazz improv program. Poetry continues at Philoctetes on December 8th with Giants, Revolutionaries, Madmen, and Exiles, Latin American poetry then and now. And there are three other roundtables. We're doing a roundtable on the subject of time that is being moderated by Mark Norell from the Museum of Natural History. That's on December 5th. We're doing a roundtable on December 11th in tandem with Sarah Ruhl's play In the Next Room, which will be premiering at Lincoln Center. That's December 11th. And we conclude our season with Aging and Creativity on December 19th. Now, good news is that Philoctetes has gotten will be getting grants from New York State Council on the Arts in poetry and in music. We're in discussions with the National Endowment for the Humanities, who are very interested in trying to do some actual emergency help with us. All of this is a preamble to saying that we need money to survive. The grants are great. Government grants come in, but they represent small amounts of money, and to run a project like this in the city of New York is rather expensive, even on the most bare bones level, which is what we're doing now. And parenthetically, I want to thank both of our guests for donating their time for this panel today. So that's about it, and we're now pleased to introduce Matthew von Unwerth. Matthew von Unwerth is the author of Freud's Requiem, Memory, Mourning, and the Invisible History of a Summer Walk. He is director of the A.A. Brill Library of the New York Psychoanalytic Institute and coordinator of the film program at the Philoctetes Center. He is a candidate in psychoanalytic training in New York. Matt will moderate this afternoon's panel and introduce our other distinguished guests.
Thank you all very much for coming. We've long wanted to do here an event around Bob Dylan because I think Dylan, for many of us, is an exemplary, or as Emerson would say, representative contemporary artist. And so an ideal object through which to parse the sources, modes, and motives of creativity that this center was convened to explore. I personally came to Bob Dylan late for someone who is as interested in music as I was. Dylan was all around me as a child, and I recall being particularly impressed with the Belly Dancer in Blue on the back of the Basement tapes. But Dylan's recordings seemed sloppy to me, and his words seemed to reach off in too many directions and down too many roads to follow him. At the time, I preferred Paul Simon, whose through-written compositions, such as Graceland, seemed more of a systematic, novelistic approach to songwriting, as well as a more direct, I-to-you mode of address. Simon's Graceland, lyrically and musically, is about the reconstructing of a memory of what has never been known, never been one's own, and has always been lost. But the materials he uses are by and large the artifacts of the culture of his time. Paul Simon is pop music's Tom Wolfe. Elvis's Graceland, Bubble Boys, talk show hosts, the lingo and argot of technology and commerce, and wise-ass middle age in the middle 80s. Who will be my role model now that my role model is gone? This theme is not so far from those of Dylan, perhaps. And in fact, one of the recurring motifs of Graceland is a Dylan lyric, blowing against the wind, hearing the wind blow, and so on. But if Simon is speaking to himself and to his generation, Dylan speaks more and more clearly as he progresses through his career with and true a tradition. And Dylan has an answer to the role model question. He sings the song of himself. He is at once his own role model, and his role model he finds in his ancestors. I believe that what I missed in what I thought of as Dylan's sloppy writing was its intertextuality, a quality that critics at least as early as Greil Marcus certainly picked up on in writing about the Basement Tapes as a return to the past. Dylan was and is always returning to something he had never known by going to the sources in folk, blues, and vaudeville, as well as in poetry, scripture, and history. This he had always done, both in the modes of his music and his lyrics. What do I mean by intertextuality? That's what our guests are here for.
No, I'm not here for that.
Not me.
Me neither. Me neither.
I'm out of here.
Out of here.
But in his work, Dylan has laid claim both to the whole Western tradition, from Milton to Shakespeare to Chaucer, the Bible, Keats, and on to more contemporary poets, and in so doing makes himself a conduit to and even creating modern tradition. Actually, he goes further than that. In a recent interview, he remarked that he owned the 60s, which one only need juxtapose against his artful dodges in his interviews in the 60s in London to see the inventiveness with which Dylan approaches his own legend. Dylan is, among other things, an extraordinary or maybe just an exemplary reader who over the years has absorbed everything he has learned. I don't know how clear or manifest this is in all the earliest stages of his writing and how this lifelong education has sharpened this trend. My own reading is that this education has had a substantial impact on his work. The sheer weight of information we have from outside about Dylan stands in sharp contrast to what we know of Shakespeare in his time, against or Chaucer or Keats or even Byron at the peak of his fame. And this information often seems in danger of overshadowing the work itself. I don't need to go into what we know about Bob Dylan. I think people know what they know. Dylan is an archive, but he is also an artist and uniquely situated at that. Because when one speaks of blowing in the wind or what the Joker said to the thief, everyone knows what we're talking about. Nearly everyone knows some of Dylan's words, or at least some of them, in a way that almost no one knows poetry these days. So for the vast majority of students today, criticism is not only a way into poetry and other literature, it is the only way, the first way. One advantage of our guest's work on Dylan is that criticism can become accessible as what it once was, a way to re-enter, to return to work that is already familiar. What is the text that is Bob Dylan? This is a question, not a statement. Is it the lyrics as recorded in the performances? Is it the cover songs that he performs? Is it his interviews, his drawings? Is it the Weberman tapes? Probably is all these things. But what among all this material is illumination, and what is just the flashbulb of the newspapermen eating candy? Professor Ricks, to my left, is well known for his expansion of his texts, of texts. For his reading of Keats's letters alongside his poems, for example. Dylan is a greatly expanded text, and presumably he will continue to expand. Dylan is also a 68-year-old man, and very nearly alone among his generation of songwriters for having continued to create and perform in generative and recombinative ways. Dylan is in all ways an object of criticism and of identification. We have chosen the word inventions to use this to name this panel because of its indefinite relation to the object. Dylan certainly has invented himself and his work many times over, but so do we invent him as we experience him and discuss him and think about what he has done to culture and what we have done to him. And with that, I turn things over to my panel. To my right, Sean Willents is Sidney and Ruth Lapidus Professor in the American Revolutionary Era at Princeton University. A recipient of the Bancroft and Beveridge Prizes in American History, he is also historian in residence at Bob Dylan's official website, www.bobdylan.com. His new book, Bob Dylan in America, will be published by Doubleday, and I hear we have to wait till September of 2010 now. To my left, Christopher Ricks.
So gloves. I mean,
Yeah, right.
to my
Bing,
left,
bing,
to
bing,
my
bing.
right. Who's the ref? I'll take sure. Thank you.
Christopher Ricks is Warren Professor of Humanities at Boston University. He was president of the Association of Literary Scholars, Critics, and Writers from 2007 to 2008, and professor of poetry at Oxford from 2004 to 2009. In 2004, he published Dylan's Visions of Sin, an extraordinary read. And if you haven't been reading literary criticism in the last 30 years, pick it up.
It's on sale afterwards, by the way, over here. So
That's
It will
right.
explain why. Pick it up and it will explain why
That's
you
right.
haven't been reading literary criticism.
And both
for
of
the
them
last
have. These are, of course, much abridged biographies of these two gentlemen, and it is a great honor and privilege to have them here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm supposed to talk about inventions, I guess. I'm not much on inventions. Bob Dylan did say that in an interview, by the way, that he owned the 60s, but he said it with high irony.
Yes.
And he said to the interviewer, "Do you want to buy him?" I'm sick of them. In fact, he's really a product of the 40s and 50s, and that has to always be borne in mind, and I suppose with the latest work. Can you hear me?
Can we hear? Keep talking, Will.
I wish I had done that.
Can you hear me now? Is it rolling? Is it rolling, Christopher? No, I blew the whole thing out, didn't I?
There we go.
There you go.
I don't think you have to. I think it should be fine.
Maybe if I move it up?
Yeah.
How's that? No, that's even worse. How's that?
Yes,
That's good,
That's
huh?
good. That's good.
Where was I? Not those. 40s,
Product of the 40s and 50s.
products of the 40s and 50s, correct. Which you see a lot in the latest album, actually, because it's all songs from, circa 1943 to 1953. So it's important to remember that, I think, because his relationship to what we think of as the pop music of the 60s was, he's older than most of these people. And he comes from a different time and place, not just Hibbing and all that, but a different time. And what he's invented comes in part out of that time, and the things that he experienced as a young man growing up and missed World War II, not that far out of the Depression, in a very, hard-struck part of the world. That comes across very clearly in some of the early songs, but the sensibility never leaves him, and it's something that I think people forget. So he's inventing in part out of that. You also wanted to know something about why we're doing what we're doing. I have no idea what we're doing. I don't know what you're doing. I'll tell you what I'm doing.
Well, yes, this is a turn late in your career, at the pinnacle of
Wait
your
a minute, I'm just starting out.
Okay.
Late.
That's me.
I shouldn't have said late. At the pinnacle.
There we go. Well, my relation to Bob Dylan has been on and off, as it were. I grew up in the Village. I grew up my dad owned a bookshop right in the middle of all of that, and he was, Bob Dylan would just come in and buy books, and I used to sell them to him because my father believed in child labor. So, actually, that's a joke, but I would work hard. I work hard there. So I was surrounded by all of that as a kid, and I loved the music, and I was introduced to it very early. In fact, talk about Oedipal problems. I mean, my father gave me my first copy of Blonde on Blonde. That's really sick. Then I forgot about Bob Dylan for a long time, from about 1978 through 1995, when I started to get back into him, and then 1997 when I really did. Someone got me back into it, and then 2001. So I've had an on-again, off-again relationship. This has been an on-again, off-again romance. But since then, I've been much more involved in thinking about it and realized how stupid I was.
In 95, what was the landmark there? Was it you went to a concert, or it just happened?
No, my father was dying.
Uh-huh.
And I listened to the last cut on World Gone Wrong. And it's an extraordinary inhabiting of that song, I think. Which gave me consolation from a place that I'd never expect to find it. Bob Dylan? Consoling? No, but it did. Very much so. And then a concert in 97. And a friend brought me to a concert, which was very important. And then 2001, I started working for them. So it's been, it's been that.
And how did you, I mean, you're a professional historian, and you found a way to bring this, what I assume began as a personal interest, into your profession, and that's part of what I guess I find so remarkable.
I don't know how much I bring it into my profession. I mean, I think that,
Well, you're
my
right.
relationship is going to be different from it than Christopher's, I think. I'll let Christopher talk about this, but I don't analyze art in the same way that a literary critic would. I mean, I look at things historically, and I think about them historically. Dylan has an extremely acute historical consciousness. His songs can make the past sound like the present and make the present sound like the past, like nobody else's. The stuff in Chronicles that he discusses about going to the New York Public Library and reading all that microfilm, I mean, that's one of the parts of the book I actually believe. I don't believe all of it, but I believe that part of it. Because what does he know about the Civil War? And that is not just it's an awareness, it's an understanding that I've read in no history book, actually. I've read nobody's diaries because it's from the present. So I suppose his historical consciousness, that part of what his art is about, has fascinated me anew. And it's becoming more and more and more a part of his art as he grows older. Or more consciously so, put it that way.
Well, I'll pick up what you said rather than what Sean said for now. You said we chose inventions. We didn't choose it.
No, I did.
That's fine, you chose it, but I wouldn't have chosen it, and I'll just give some reasons. Dylan's against inventions, needs you to test for inventions. Man has invented his doom. Invented for Dylan isn't a good... He's a discoverer. Right. And that's a much, much more profound thing to be an inventor, though we need inventors. Discover is a word that comes again and again in the songs. Invent, and of course he hates the idea that he reinvents himself. I'm not reinventing myself. It's out there, the scholars say I'm reinventing myself. So for me, quite a lot would turn on the difference between those two words. It's true that invent just means you come upon it and so on, but that's not what it has come to mean as the word has developed. So I think discovery is what he does. Terry Kelly for The Bridge asked me when I discovered Dylan, which was very sweet. I said, I didn't discover him, he discovered me. And this is what he has done for pretty well everybody. He has never met, I think, the people in this room, or only some of them who've been lucky enough to meet him, and yet he has discovered you, because he knows the things that occur to you without knowing you. One of the things I love about him and honor about him is that he is not afraid of being terrifically like other people. Want you to be just like them is not necessarily a bad thing. Everybody's hung up on their uniqueness. I don't mind being a type. I'm a septuagenarian, bald Englishman who's trying to curry favor with Americans, especially beautiful young Americans, by pretending to love Bob Dylan. There are hundreds of out there. What's so bad about being a type? I mean, everybody's a type. If you want to go around all the time being nothing but unique, you're in for terrible trouble. On the other hand, I have different fingerprints from everybody else, and Dylan, I think, is simply wonderful on all those things that have to do with commonality. Commonality is not enough, but nor is singularity or individuality. So that for me, a lot for me would turn simply on the word inventions, because discover he keeps coming back to in the songs, just as he has. Of course, now you don't have to know anything, and you don't have to remember anything. I got on in my profession because I have a good memory for words, though not for numbers. Now all you do is you just write the thing in, and the machine tells you. I liked it when I just had to learn it. But it's striking to me that there's the same number, almost exactly, of matching songs for the word old as for the word new. Now that's the kind of thing which I simply find out by going to a screen. But it is rather extraordinary. There are a couple of hundred matching songs for the word new and a couple of hundred for the word old, and that's quite right, because innovation needs continually to be arched against a respect for, you said a tradition. Well, no, I mean there are umpteen traditions. Dylan has never respected one tradition only, and one of the great things about him is the plurals. He doesn't have a voice, he has voices. Isn't that right? He doesn't have a mood, he has moods. He doesn't have a conviction, he has a whole body of convictions. And he knows that it's right for those to change from time to time. But I agree that you have a terrific feeling for the historical contexts, and with one of the things I admire about your writing is that social history is never subordinated to or subordinating individual histories. Do you know, I mean, history keeps switching, doesn't it? It's the lives of great men that all remind us that the grave is not our goal, and so on. People get bored with that and want the lives of ordinary people, but I think you've written very well about the ways in which the lives of great people and the lives of ordinary people have to be at one.
Exactly.
Anyway, that's my bit for now.
So we're off inventions.
Well, that's fine. In fact, perhaps we could amend it to then be the discoveries of, or I mean, maybe.
I've got a lot of objections to discoveries. Oh, no.
So let's say instead that the crucial.
That comes up to me.
The crucial thing missing from inventions is that Bob Dylan perhaps is finding something that has been covered and is rediscovering. Is that perhaps? But what is missing in inventions implies novelty, that he is creating himself out of whole cloth, whereas in fact Dylan is much more involved in and implicated in traditions. And part of the reason I chose it in the first place is also because how people look at him, or how he is regarded. And we have a culture that I think prizes novelty and prizes innovation, perhaps in ways that are not well thought out.
I mean, but Dylan very early on said, "Look, the song was there before I got there. I just discovered it. The song exists. It's not as if he is. It's not about artifice. It's not about something that's that quotidian. It's about something else. It's about discovering it. It's there. Now that has a lot of meanings. I mean, he's playing around with a lot of different things there. It means, in fact, he's using other people's songs or songs that he's heard out there. But the song was there before he was, and so he can grab it. He can find it. And maybe grabbing is what he's about. I don't know, but that's what it is. That's the way he thinks about what he's doing, I think, and he said so. But I mean, I think the point you're making, Matthew, is the materials which he goes about discovering things, the things he uses, his what is it, his dowser, right? They're curious. They're curious ones. I mean, he's a bit of an alchemist in that sense. He brings together things that other people overlook, that the forms that seem dead, like folk music. I mean, what a dead form in 1960. And has an ability to bring something else to it, and something else that might be dead, like Bing Crosby, and voila. But that explosion is what allows him to discover the thing that was out there before he came along. I think. That makes sense?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm not mystical or religious in any respect. It's one of the things I enjoy and admire in him is that he is. I mean, I'm going back to the idea that we have works of art, among other things, in order to show us ways of looking at the world that are not our own. And there's been a bad move in that in the last 20 or 30 years, where more and more art has been valued because it endorses what you believe.
Oh, yeah.
And the idea that it's valuable because it introduces you sympathetically to things that you don't believe, that has taken a second place. I'm not a Christian. I think his Christian songs are simply wonderful. And if I were ever to become a Christian again, it would be because of What Can I Do For You, as it would be because of poems by George Herbert. But that has gone. The key thing, I think, is that the invention, I don't think it's from whole cloth or anything quite, but I think there is a different tone, and the White Knight is wrong to say it's my own invention. Lewis Carroll knows that way madness lies. If you really think things are your own invention, they're not just that. Blake says, though they are not mine, I call them mine. About the things he created, and that's a wonderful, wonderful sense. It's not my sense of life, but I think it's really thrilling to think if you're Blake and you're only calling them yours, where do they come from? They're inspiration. I think we agree largely.
But also, no, I mean, the thing I was stupid about was precisely the religious songs, and it took me a long time to get over that prejudice. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, when Slow Train Comin' came out, Slow Train Comin' is Gotta Serve Somebody's a good song, but I didn't get the rest of it. And then by the time we got into Save, and I couldn't even do Shot of Love. Now, I look back on that and I'm shocked. I'm shocked at how stupid I was.
Yeah.
Because those are wonderful, wonderful records.
Yeah, they are.
I don't know if they'd be, if I ever were a Christian, I want to be that kind of Christian.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This reminds me a little bit of Eliot, the tradition and the impersonality.
Yes. Well, yeah, I think it's a pity that Eliot made it one tradition. You see,
Right.
tradition and the individual talent is one of each. I mean, I yield to nobody in my admiration and love of Eliot, not even to you. But I think there is something in Eliot that goes for the singular. You get the singular all the time, and the jugular. But Dylan, it's very magnanimous. Dylan's astonishingly magnanimous, I think.
Absolutely.
What do we think about his borrowings and the so-called controversies that have arisen? Is it any different than any other poet, or does it just reflect our times that people make such a stink when it's discovered that he has?
I think Google has a lot to answer for. Before Google, you didn't realize you can just type this thing in, and you had a concordance, but you actually could go to the library to find this stuff out. Now you can do it in 2 seconds. Pain in the nut. Borrowings. You mean like Henry Timrod?
For example.
Okay. How many people here have heard of Henry Timrod before Bob?
Very good.
None of you.
There's somebody.
None of you.
Yeah.
Believe me, I know none of you have heard of it. This is one thing I know about everybody here. Nobody ever heard of Henry Timrod. Why? Because Henry Timrod is basically a second-rate Confederate poet. He's not a very good poet. If you read the stuff, it's not very good. There's a couple of lines here and there, and those couple of lines here and there are what he was reading when he was reading about the Civil War, and he put in his box, and he rediscovered, and he made something new out of it. What you're getting is not Henry Timrod, you're getting Bob Dylan. So I find most of this controversy is just a silly one because it has nothing to do with the art we're listening to. It certainly has nothing to do with Henry Timrod.
I do broadly agree. I think that, Eliot says that about being original with the minimum of alteration. Right. He says it's sometimes just as wonderful to be, and that comes up with the borrowing question. How much do you have to, if you go to Timrod, what's the difference between frailer than the flowers and more frailer than the flowers? Now, the double comparative went out centuries ago, isn't that right? It's now illiterate to say more frailer, but it's very, very beautiful, and it's not the same thing to say. I mean, you go back to Shakespeare. Shakespeare loves double comparatives as he loves double superlatives. Your most best. You're not just best, you're most best. I mean, it's a wonderful thing to be able to summon. So I think a lot would turn on whether you think more frailer is really significantly different from saying frailer. And simply the things he adds in singing. I was at the Boston concert on Friday, and people here will know concerts that I haven't been to, but I hadn't heard him sing before for the first 2 verses of Just Like a Woman. Yeah, but she breaks just like a little girl. Now, I didn't like it actually the first time, but I liked it when I realized he wasn't going to do it when he turned to her. Instead of being she, you, then the yeah falls away. Do you know what I mean? It falls away because there's something vindictive at that moment. I mean, it's fine if you're talking about her to somebody else, as he is in the first 2 verses, but for her. So now that's tiny. It's a tiny difference to make, and you can think he sings words like yeah and well and so on whenever he feels like it, but it actually terrifically changes the relationship within the song. And it's tiny, but if in changing his own work so much can happen by something so small, I think we should take the same view about what it is when something from Timrod, or of course much more importantly from Eliot, gets into him.
Absolutely. I mean, he can write a song called like Tangled Up in Blue, in which you just change a couple of the pronouns.
Yes.
The whole song changes.
Yeah.
He can write songs like that. There aren't too many people who are doing that kind of songwriting, that kind of lyrical writing today. Yeah. But that's right. I mean, he has this very, very sharp ear for language, and so when he's picking up on these things, these aren't. Even the Yakuza, and the Japanese Yakuza.
Yes,
I mean, he was writing about tough guys. He found ways to write about other kinds of things using those tough guy images. But
can you just explain to the audience briefly what
jacuzzi? It's a large bath.
He wrote an entire song about sitting in a jacuzzi. Well, never mind.
I'm sorry.
I was going there. Yakuza is a Japanese gangster, and there was a man who's written a sort of memoir, as told to memoir, of a Japanese gangster, and Bob Dylan read it, and then 2 years after Love and Theft came out, or 3 years after, it was a while before people finally caught on. People realized that some of the images, some of the words, some of the trains of words were the same as this book. And this is really what began the great, Ripoff controversy. But you know, some of the things, you know, the line about the feudal lord. I mean, you know, he's taking it from a feudal context, which means something completely different from what he has to say, and it fits what he has to say in a very, very different way. It means nothing in English like it does in Japanese. It couldn't historically, emotionally, nothing. But it fit what he was doing, and you know, and he had that piece of paper.
So you distinguish it from Doris Kearns Goodwin as a historian?
Is this on television? I think that Bob Dylan is a historian unlike any other.
Okay, yeah.
Which is to say that I enjoy reading him or listening to him and reading him more than I do most of my colleagues, because he can give you a sense of a place. Well, even Across the Green Mountain, which is not a great song, but it's an okay song. But what he does is, by using Whitman, actually, it's basically Whitman's poem. But he re-inhabits these things, you see.
Across the Green Mountain, just to interrupt, is a song about the Civil War that he did for a movie, I think, called Gods.
For an absolutely execrable movie called Gods and Generals, which you should not see. But do see the trailer, which has him dressed up in a top hat, with his top hat, always his top hat, right? Going back to Dan Kramer's in the back. Going through the various camps of the Civil War and seeing dead people, basically. And it's a song about, basically about a pair of parents finding out that their son has been wounded. By the time that they read the letter, he's dead.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a Whitman poem called "Come from the Field's Father" or something like that, I think. But he re-inhabits it, as he re-inhabits all of the old songs, as he re-inhabits everything. Nothing is quite the same once Bob Dylan has entered it. And that is an ability which most historians, in fact, I can't think of any historian actually has, to re-inhabit the past and to communicate it in ways that are concise. Concise, not wordy.
My bad taste remark about Doris Kearns Goodwin was, of course, about plagiarism rather than about the value of history.
Oh, I know.
Well, the one side of the controversy is that Dylan is guilty of some horrible crime for borrowing, but the other side is that it deeply enriches the networks that he attaches himself to, which I think is probably more of the position that we would all agree in, because the songs then become, they're opened up infinitely, because and that in a sense is what both of your work does in different ways, because you situate Dylan in these networks that he has already situated himself in. And I mean, we might talk about his most recent turn as a new Bing Crosby, that he's just published an album, if you don't know, called Christmas in the Heart, which is almost entirely composed of songs that were recorded originally by Bing Crosby, as I think you noted in a post, and which some people take as a joke, but you've argued that it's far from it. And
want me to defend Christmas in the Heart for a sec? Is that
yes?
Okay.
Yes.
Go out and buy this record. Your $9.99 will go to charity.
First
number
of all,
one.
yes.
I take that seriously.
Yeah, no, very good.
I take that very seriously. I mean, it's going to go to feed hungry people. I've said this in this review. I said he's being the Woody Guthrie song "Pretty Boy Floyd." Pretty Boy Floyd sticks up banks and gives Christmas dinner to the families on relief. That's what Bob Dylan's doing. Yeah, he's giving Christmas dinner to the families on relief. So that's number one. The music is from the 40s and 50s. It is old Christmas songs. Oh, look, if America's had a folk music since 1930 or since commercial recording, what is that folk music going to be? It's going to be Christmas songs. Everybody knows the Christmas songs. I mean, people who don't even know Bob Dylan songs know White Christmas. Now this is Christmas imperialism, as I've come to call it. It's terrible. It's awful, right? Christians, Muslims, Jews. I mean, it's not, we have to sing White Christmas. But he sings those songs, the songs that he was surrounded by as a boy growing up in Hibbing, as a Jewish boy growing up in Hibbing. So it's an evocation of the past. He's got what's the name of the two-girl group? Does somebody here know? The Diddy Bops. He has got the whitest white bread singers you have ever heard, backing him up, right? I mean, you're instantly taken back to another place. Yet beneath it all, there is his music as well. I mean, Donnie Heron is there, and this pedal steel is very, very subtle. And he does a polka song, which is "To Die." He does "Must Be Santa." Now, you have to understand that in Hibbing, In the Midwest generally, in the 40s and 50s, polka was a big deal. You heard polka all over the place, with such stars as Whoopi John Wilfart. It's a true name.
Yes.
With an H, F-A-R-H-T. And Frank Yankovic, who I think may be related to Weird Al Yankovic. I'm not quite sure how. At any rate, he's not. Oh, what a shame. Crushed again. But anyway, What Must Be Santa is a song that is it's a polka song, and it uses an arrangement from a contemporary Texas rock polka group. But again, it brings us back in that time, and he sings it with great joy. I mean, it's a joyous album. If you want to enjoy Christmas, I don't care what your religion is or of no religion. I have no religion, but I enjoyed that record. I enjoyed that sentiment for the same reason I enjoy reading Dickens on Christmas. Yeah. For the same reason I enjoy the best of Christmas is that, and it's in that record. That's my defense. But Christmas.
It both solved the Christmas present problem and did the opposite, because everybody's giving it to one another. So you don't get any presents this Christmas. I've given one to each of my 7 children. I don't know that they will all appreciate it equally, but something of that. It's not very religious, is it? I mean, I think you're praising it for that, and I think you're right. But I wouldn't want it to push aside that the religion. I mean, he's always been a really religious artist, hasn't he? And those of us who are not religious, that's what's very important. Religious people have had more problems with him than atheists. I mean, I just describe myself as, in Who's Who, I'm an atheist. John Silber, the rather controversial former president of my university, wrote me a note just now saying, Bob Dylan's brought out Christmas songs. They're enough to make anyone an atheist. And I want to say, yeah, well, that's what's rather good about the measure. But he did go on to say, I know beauty is in the ear of the listener, and you probably think it's the voice of an angel. And the answer is, I do. I mean, John Silber used to call him Dylan Thomas all the time to annoy the hell out of me. He'd say, your love of Dylan, oh, and then he'd correct it and so on. But these aren't truly religious songs, are they? I mean, they are festivity songs. They're seasonal songs. Even Adeste Fidelis, your
resonates with there's a religiosity attached to that I think is a note of sincerity. The last word on the album is Amen.
Yes, well, it's not an irreligious.
No, it isn't an irreligious or anti-religious. I think it doesn't have the depth of his real religious. I don't think it has. I don't think it has the depth of the real religious songs, early or late, Hebrew Bible, all mine. It doesn't really, and it doesn't have the fierceness of God said to Abraham, "Kill me a son." I mean, that's taking religion seriously, isn't it? I mean, through blasphemy. No, it's going back to Highway 61, just there, but. And I think he's always understood that great religious art has to be accusable of blasphemy. If the accusation sticks, it's not the greatest religious art. If the accusation doesn't arise, then you were playing safe, and you will never quit. Right. And he's always understood that erotic art can be accused of being soft porn or even hard porn. He's always understood, I think, the terrific risks that you're obliged to, that all songs about relations between men and women are accusable of sexism. Every great writer, artist who's tackled relations between the sexes has been accused of sexism. Jane Austen is accused of sexism, absolutely. And not to be accused means that you were a coward, right, basically. Yeah, yeah. In the end, the accusation, just like a woman, I mean, you remember Michael Gray saying the only way which it could be a good song is if it's gay. It's just like a woman, because you're not really a woman, you're a man, and so on. Now, Gray dropped that. He published that. But he says the only way, which would save it from being a terribly bad song, but the song is accusable of sexism, isn't it? I mean, I think the accusation doesn't stick, because I think it's a song about it being a very unfortunate thing for a woman to go along with or to play the little girl card. As Dylan thinks it's very bad for men to play the little boy card. After all, the same album gives you Little Boy Lost. He takes himself so seriously. So that just like a little girl, seems to me, she does not behave like a woman. And far from it being the accusation that she does behave like a woman, the accusation is that she does not. And even take, which friends of mine have said must be an accusation. No, it's very difficult to take.
See, but I see that. I hear that song as a howl of pain too, though. A
Yeah, it
terrible
is.
howl
Yeah,
of
nobody feels any pain means except me.
well, you know, but he's ended this relationship with a other girl.
Yeah.
But you know, fog, amphetamine, and pearls.
Yeah.
But it's a train wreck. It's turning into a train wreck, and he's just saying goodbye. And I just see it as a. But he's howling with pain, I think.
Well, I think I don't think he's just saying goodbye, because I think nobody ever just says goodbye. Everybody always says, don't think twice, it's all right. I mean, everybody always says, I mean, you know, go back to the ancient tradition in sonnets, I'm down on my knees, I've absolutely had it, but it wouldn't be too late if you would just, in the last line of the sonnet, say, love you. Well, people say it on the phone, don't they, all the time? Love you. Just that.
Do you hear that in that song?
Pardon?
Do you hear that in that song?
In
Like a Woman?
Oh, yes, I do.
do?
Because I think the pain isn't to be comprehend. I mean, there's some wish at the end. If anybody says, I think, I believe it's time for us to quit, nobody ever says, everybody always wants you to say, well, no, it isn't really, isn't that right? You say that. And of course, to rhyme on quit means you can't quit it. If you rhyme fit and quit, they fit together, and the one word was refused to quit the other one. It's just stayed there.
I ask you a question. You're English.
My mother was French, but it occupies only in the navel
So
down.
I thought I could. I thought I could bring in Matthew Arnold here.
Please.
Do you regard coming back to this religious question and just the things you've been saying here? It reminded me of the kind of. Is he a Hebraicist or a Hellenist? You know what I'm saying? He made the famous dichotomy.
Conduct as against.
And so we were dealing a little bit with the Christian element, but then I started to think, is he? And then the Judaism came in. But is he a Hebraicist by nature, or is Hebraic? Arnold said it was the dichotomy between the Hebraic and the Hellenic, strictness of obedience versus spontaneity of consciousness, as I recall. And so we're talking about there seems to be an element of this of a didacticism, of a kind of concern about teaching how to live a little bit, a little bit of the. I mean, even in the argument you're talking about here now.
He was raising his eyebrows and rolling his eyes. The people who can only see the back of Sean said his best feature, I may say. If you could
The back or the eyes?
no, but you can say something.
No, I wasn't. I was looking to you, actually, to say something about it. Matthew.
Well, I think that contrast of conduct, I mean, that is, there are some people who make too little of conduct. I sometimes think that my children have insufficiently appreciated how good the conduct is of the people who are their boyfriends or girlfriends or husbands or wives. Conduct, I mean, you can say, but all he does is always take out the trash and not complain about it. But that's very good. Okay, if we, clears the table and so on. Arnold is right to say that he puts a different figure in. Is that 3/4 of life? Is it 2/3 of life? It's daft to put a figure on it. But it's true that you need something else. You need spontaneity of consciousness. You need a certain kind of cultural. I mean, so that people will have life and have it more abundantly, if I can quote the good book, is not a moral or conduct matter. To have life more abundantly is a spiritual matter, not an ethical or a moral matter. And I think Dylan is very good at never subduing any one of these things. You know how people will say, well, that may not be entirely accurate, but it's true. Hang on a minute, accuracy and truth have to have a closer relation than you're allowing there, but not so close that you identify truth with accuracy. So, and that must be a question for a historian, mustn't it? Because you will find this isn't really accurate. I mean, Gibbon isn't accurate, but there are truths that Gibbon gets hold of about what empire is, despite. Does that make sense?
Well, absolutely. I mean, some of his readings of the American Civil War are bizarre, but through that bizarreness, he can, as I say, inhabit the time and the place better than any historian can.
Yeah.
It is actually, though. I mean, as far as facts go, just facts. He is factually pretty good.
Yeah.
He's factually pretty good. Even the memoir. I mean, the memoir is factually. I read the book and I went back down McDougal Street just to see if those things were there.
Yeah.
And they are.
Yeah.
Well, they were.
Yeah.
And I can remember that they were.
Yeah.
So, where is he, in Malibu or something, remembering all of that.
Yeah.
So he is factually, his handling of history is factually there. It's just that that's not the important thing.
Well, no, I wanted to, you see, I think someone get you facts when someone attacks your imagination. I mean, facts attacks is a good rhyme, but we mustn't be people who only believe in facts or only believe in imagination.
Right.
I mean, it'd be like believing in a mill and not believing in any grist to go through
Correct.
it. You've either got, you need a mill and you need some grist to go through it, or you might as well not have a mill. So I think he's wonderful at keeping these
I think
things
that's right.
in.
He has more facts, too, than most people do.
Yes, yeah.
Absolutely.
But also, I mean, he's not a historian, he's an artist. And isn't the point of art more or less to make commentary on the present or to elaborate on the present for our more greater fulfillment? So
Some of us
No,
think that historians
no.
are artists, actually. There are those who
that's
think
your
that...
opinion. I mean, that's not.
Well, of course,
I don't
I'm
think
an historian.
That's an aesthetic analysis. But regard, that's another debate entirely. But I'm talking, Dylan is not intending, I would assume, to do anything other than to say something that has relevance to his audience, which is in the present.
But historians do the same. I mean, I don't know that he's not an historian. I mean, he's an artist, to be sure.
Well, is there a difference between art and history? I mean, if there isn't, then...
Well, no, there are artists
Yes.
who are historians, and there are artists who are not. There are historians who are not artists, and there are historians who are. I think he's one of those people who's both. He's a very numinous character. I'm not going to say that he's not an historian.
I just think the fact that he is an artist, he's a musician, he's not a poet either. He's a musician who sings in a poetic manner, in my opinion. But, the fact that he is a performer and an artist, I don't want that, but is relevant, that I think sometimes there's a little bit being lost sight of in some of the things you're saying to me.
Okay, well, I think what I'm doing is praising an artist, but I praise artists for the opposite reason from you. I think artists are people who are as interested in the past as in the present, and who think that the present is in terrible trouble unless it is profoundly interested in the past. Partly because you don't have a notion of the present except by contrasting it with something. You can't have a figure. I mean, Blonde on Blonde is one of his best jokes, not only because it's about one woman after another, but because it's about the difficulty of perception. If it's blonde on blonde, it's damnably difficult to see. It's like a whiter shade of pale and so on. So, I mean, I think you characterize the artist, I think you mischaracterize the artist when you say that the artist, well, relevant to the present was a modification, wasn't it? You started by saying interested in the present.
I'm not ruling out historical consciousness.
Well, but you didn't. Well, yeah, I don't know. Well, I think we have a disagreement about the number of things that will go to the making of art, or to the, because you said the one thing. Now, I think there's never one thing. Matthew Arnold attacked the idea that there was one. There's never one thing. Artists are people who understand the extraordinary number of compounds there are. Right. I mean, my students will often say such and such is more important, but the analogy would be, as it were, that hydrogen was more important than oxygen in water because there's twice as much of it. No, it isn't. The hydrogen and oxygen are equally important in water. Being twice as much has nothing to do with it. It's this extraordinary compound. And Dylan always answers the question about words or music by going round. He knows perfectly well that it's the extraordinary compound of the words, the voice, and the music, so that, you know what I mean? So maybe the disagreement between us isn't much.
Who cares? You said something interesting in response.
Thank you. One travels all this way, one does one's best.
To which I only add, though, the word music, the thing is sometimes left out is the instrument, is the music, not the tune and melody, but the sound.
Yeah.
And the sound is deeply important to Dylan.
Yeah, and I'm not good on sound.
Right.
Greer Marcus is the only Dylan critic, I think, who is brilliant on catching what a voice sounds like, setting down in words what a voice sounds like. I think Marcus is extraordinary. I think Bob Shelton was able to do it. The sleeve notes on the first album, I mean, not only the review by Bob Shelton, but the sleeve notes as Stacey Williams, that he has these wonderful impressionistic notions of what Dylan does to a word when he pulls it out, and it's really lovely. It's a prose poem, to go back to your thought. But I'm not good on. Are you good on voices?
I try, but I'm also interested in the instruments. I mean, the Thin Wild Mercury sound. This is something that he talked about. He talked about the kind of music, the sound he tried to get. And in an interview, we talked about the Thin Wild Mercury sound that he had on Blonde on Blonde. Yeah. Now, there are a lot of ways to parse that, but one thing is a certain combination of harmonica, guitar, especially the lower parts of the lower notes on the guitar, and a particular kind of organ. That Al Kooper was playing. Out of that combination comes a sound. And without that sound, you don't have that record. That's the sound. I mean, Al Kooper says it's the sound of 3 a.m. Nobody gets it better, even Frank Sinatra. And that comes not just from his voice, although it does, but it doesn't come from the fact that it was 3 a.m. when they were cutting a lot of those records, but it comes from the sound that he achieved.
yeah.
And that is something that's crucial to Dylan and sometimes gets forgotten.
But there's also, I mean, a lot of his, from what I've read about the process, his records, historically, at least up till now, were all made very quickly, and they were in almost often thrown together situations.
Well, let's take the case of Blonde on Blonde, though. I mean, Blonde on Blonde, he insisted on recording live. He records a lot of things live. And in fact, his producer in Nashville only figured out how to get the album done by taking down what they call baffles. Baffles are things that separate different musicians from one another so they don't bleed into each other's microphones. He took down the baffles. They were going to play as if they were on stage, right? And you might, it's all 1 or 2 takes, but realize that long before Dylan even showed up in the studio, Al Cooper was down from the mountaintop teaching all of these guys who are brilliant musicians. They didn't have to take a lot of time learning it, what exactly Dylan wanted on that record. So by the time, there's a lot of prep work. It's like being a professor, actually. You give the lecture, but there's a lot of work that goes on behind it.
I'm glad you think that.
I do. You're spontaneous? You're that spontaneous? I'm not. I have to.
No, I'm just thinking of my colleagues who seem to me never to do a hand's turn.
Well, that's something else.
Wandering with an old envelope on the back of which they've jotted down John Dunn, question mark.
Dylan doesn't work that way.
And is it your idea that Dylan actually did the prep work with, say, Al Cooper?
Absolutely.
That he did.
I know he did.
Okay.
And he does that on a lot of his records. There's one record where he didn't, which is a brilliant one, where he just sort of walked in and did it, and it came off in one night, and it was superb, which was another side of Bob Dylan.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he just came in and did it. But there's a lot more, Dylan is, it's not artifice, but he's a craftsman. I mean, he does not let that stuff slide. He knows what he's doing because he wants spontaneity. He doesn't want it to be overdubbed. He doesn't want it to be dull. He doesn't want it to be manufactured. He doesn't want it to be invented.
Yeah.
He wants it to be live. That's part of what he gets from the beats and lots of other things.
Yeah.
But he approaches it with a great sense of craft, right down to what kind of microphone he's using. And that's all very important to him.
There's one, I mean, you've probably heard it, there are 10 or 12 successive versions of Tell Old Bill in rehearsal.
Yep.
It is, I mean, it's not, I think, a great song. I mean, it's an immensely better song than I can imagine, and it might take not, but it's not. But you just hear 10 or 12 versions. So it's like minor key, and then, but it's really a fascinating thing, and the relation with his musicians is terrifically good in it.
Yes.
I mean, the whole way. He says, I can't hear this coming in, and so on, and then cut out the turnaround, and so on. There are just these moments, and it's really very educative. It's almost as good as the scene teaching dancing in Dirty Dancing, which, I mean, I think that's one of the great, and it's one of the greatest things that we have on the screen of what it is to try to teach somebody something. I think it's very, very, very moving and good. Best bit of the film.
In the
I
movie
thought.
Dirty
Dancing?
Dancing?
In the movie, yeah. Just
Really?
It's terrifically imaginative about what it is to teach. I mean, corporeal teaching, I don't do. But
Absolutely.
That brings up a question that I have for both of you, which is what can be fairly regarded as Dylan's work? Because the Tell Old Bill, I've listened to those bootleg sessions also, which are 12 different versions of a song that was recorded for a movie that 1/10 of 1% of the reading public will listen to. And Dylan, probably, I think they were leaked. I don't think he wanted them out at all. But there's lots of Dylan material that is not authorized. Dylan is the manuscripts that we have show that he's a very careful writer, at least, and only lets out, in general, what he intends to let out. What does all this extra material mean?
The Apocrypha? I mean, look, some of it is great. I mean, to have all those concert tapes, I mean, I'm sure you do too, Christopher, but I have shelves full of CDs of various concerts that have been done. Some of them are high quality, some of them are low quality. Yeah. But you can hear things in there, and the intonation, the example that you just gave in Boston, of him adding a couple of words or changing something. You're never going to get that any other way. I mean, he's a performer too, and the performance aspect of his art cannot be forgotten. So I think all of that is wonderful. I personally like having the session tapes available. I wish more were available, actually, because you can see that process of invention. That's nothing that necessarily is going to be something that all of the listeners in the room want to, are going to want to hear. But I think for some of us, it's great. It's quite valuable. I thought you were going to go in a different direction. Actually,
We'll go in the direction
and
you
talk
thought.
about all of the other things he's done, like his.
The heat a little. I think people feeling a little bit cold.
You cold?
That's what.
Hot air will
We'll get-
help. Yeah.
We'll do it.
Okay, sorry.
I thought you were going to be asking about like the art and stuff, and you know the things outside of that. Well, I mean, I don't think he's a very good artist myself. I don't.
Well, that's yes. Okay.
I mean, as a picture drawer, I think it's.
But what then to make of the fact that he has decided to, whether it's good or not, that the fact that he's decided to make this public, decided even in the last decade to make his memoirs public, to talk to Scorsese, to grant more interviews, to.
Well, the memoirs. I mean, the memoirs are superb, and the memoirs I think is as good an example of that genre as I've read in a long time, across the board. You know, I don't think he's. I think he loves to draw. I think he loves to color the things that he's drawing, and I think that there are museum directors who want to put it on, and he's happy to do so, and he's happy to come out. I don't know that it's much more than that.
Well, no, I think there are deeper fears in it. I mean, that is ready for to fade into my own parade. He is never going to be ready to fade into his own parade. That's a real problem because there is always a parade for him. One thing to do about that is to multiply the number of parades. So that in a funny way, I mean, and these are things I've written down. I may not have written down, but he's like the cuttlefish that escapes by telling you where it is. So he maximizes public appearances and is therefore less trapped in any one public appearance. So that seemed to be part of it. I mean, you'll remember the only capital letter in advice to Geraldine on her miscellaneous birthday, the capital N for not. Do not create anything. It will be misinterpreted. It will not change. It will follow you the rest of your life. And that's a real fear for an artist. It's a real fear for an actor, or especially a performing artist, just caught forever in some role and unable to get out of it. So I think the multiplicity of things that he's doing are all ways of not being stamped and labelled, like as in the Lenny Bruce song. I mean, Lenny Bruce was stamped and labelled, but it was partly his fault, wasn't it? He didn't have enough ways of being himself. Isn't that right? I mean, he had this terrific way of being himself, and the song is full of admiration for him. But the Taxi once and so on, it's like an hour and a half and so on. There's a feeling, well, it's all used up, isn't it? Bruce is all used up in that one extraordinary thing that he could do, like certain caricaturists. Gerald Scarfe, Ralph Steadman. These, I think, are terrific, but they have only one thing that they can do. So Dylan, I think, is always trying to get. It's not reinventing himself. It's just
doing something else.
Well, that movie. What's the name of the movie that the fictional
Masked and Anonymous, or
Masked and Anonymous, great movie.
No, the other one.
I'm not there. Yeah.
Terrible movie.
The one where there are the many
That's
personae.
I'm not there, which.
Yeah. Well, you know, Mike, have I talked? No, we haven't met. Ledger was murdered. Everybody who pretends to be Dylan in that film is going to be murdered. I mean, nobody dies of an overdose of drugs. We've seen the films. Everybody always dies because they've been murdered. And there is a demented English professor out there who is going to kill every one of the people who pretended to be Dylan in I'm Not There. And she's going to be last because she was both the best at acting and the most pointless because she acted footage which we already have of Dylan being himself. So Mark, just watch the papers over the next year or so and see one by one it's going to be like Jack Ruby and those people. Have a photo, see them crossed out one by one. Former Oxford professor of poetry arrested for snuffing out bad people
for wandering around Long Branch, New Jersey, but that's something else.
I wanted to.
Sorry, that was a conversation killer. I'm so sorry.
No, it wasn't. I'm regaining my composure.
Love your discomposure.
Thank you. To return to Dylan's consciousness of the past, he's now had a career going on 50 years. And I guess if anything can be said about his consciousness of his own past, his productive past, and perhaps a related question, is there a way to trace something in the arc of his career in any way? I made it intentionally open.
I don't know. I hesitate to do that. I mean, because it keeps evolving. I'm very. He's going to live a long time. I hope.
Yes.
But one thing I've noticed, and this also goes to the Christmas record. I mean, one thing that Dylan has done repeatedly, there are patterns. in his art and in his writing. And that is, there are times when I think he feels used up. This goes to what you're talking about. I mean, he doesn't want, but in his main gig, he does feel used up. I think he felt used up after, in the very late 60s. I think he felt used up in the 1980s. And I don't know that he's felt used up now, but whenever he does do cover records.
Yes.
He'll do Self-Portrait, which got slammed.
Very good record, yeah.
It's an excellent record. And it's him relearning himself. He did the 2 acoustic albums in the early 90s when he was used up. The second of which I think is superb. The first one is good. The second is I think, brilliant. And now he's done another cover record of Christmas songs. Yeah. So God knows what's going to happen next. Yeah. But he does do that when he's feeling as if he's getting either used up or getting caught in a bind. Or if everybody's got him figured out, but maybe he himself has figured himself out a little bit too much, he's going to try to go to the well springs again and find something new, or find himself again, or find another part of himself again in this older music. Yeah. The thing about the Christmas record, though, is that, there's talk about getting session tapes. There's, if you go to, all the Dylan freaks here will know this, Olaf Jorner's site, which there's a site on the internet where there's a list of every single session, every single recording session. And there was one session in 1983. They were doing Infidels, which is a very interesting record. And about halfway through, they were doing 2 weeks of sessions, grueling, day after day after day after day. And, if you're doing anything for that kind of time, you're going to get worn out after a while. So the musicians they weren't getting it. So Dylan says, well, as a band leader will, let's try something else just to mix it up a little bit. So what did they play? They played Silent Night. They played a Louis Jordan song from 1946. This is 1983. And then 2 years later, he gives an interview to someone saying how much he admires Bing Crosby. So that reinvention, if you will, of what's happening now is it goes back 20 years. I mean, this has all been in his head for a long time. Yeah. But that is one pattern. It's the cover album. Yeah. There's one clue. Yeah.
And I think that often works as translation does for writing. I mean, Robert Lowell, comes to some moment and then he's going to translate. Translations are cover versions, basically. Exactly. I mean, at least they can be seen under that aspect. So you feel it's a break from something, but you're keeping your hand in, all right, because you're writing well. But I think there's also, you might think there are lots of kinds of genius, but there seem to me, as with acting, there are, I can immediately see two clearly. There's the actor who is always in some way himself, like Jack Nicholson, and who is extraordinary. It's extraordinary how much Nicholson can do, given that he is always himself. I mean, the person in the Pledge, he's playing the same kind of character as in The Last Detail, as in Five. You go back through. There's something terrifically consistent and moving about that, but it's not thrilling in the way in which it doesn't have the same thrill as Olivier. I mean, Olivier's Othello. I mean, even if you're conscious of Olivier because of his great force of personality, his Othello is just in a different world from his Richard III. So that I think that Dylan's genius, and again, these will be things that you and I have thought about and said, it's more like Picasso than it's like some other great artists.
Yes,
I mean,
exactly
Picasso, he does one thing, and then he does another thing, and then he does another thing, and then he does it to plates, not even to paintings.
Tom Thumb's Blue period, right?
Well, you could do that. Thank you. Beckett's genius is the opposite. Beckett very, very early on knew that as soon as he got out from under James Joyce, there would be one thing he would do, and he would go on doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it, absolutely indeflectibly. And the danger of that is, as it were, monotony, whether of a high kind or not. The danger of the Dylan gift is of a kind of sort of like being a flibbertigibbet in some way. You can do this, you can kind of do anything. So I do think there are radically different kinds of genius in this. Right. We've got great musicians who do go on and on doing the same thing, isn't that right? But others who aren't don't.
What speaks to that?
Excuse me, we have a question and answer period. We'll open up in a few minutes.
I invited you. It's my fault. To say something, I mean.
You have to come up to the mic.
Go to the mic.
So are we ready to open it up, or do you want to wait a few more minutes?
Well, let's let her make her.
Okay, they can come to the mic. Because we can't get any, no one will hear it.
Equal opportunity.
Please identify yourself.
I'm Betsy Nolan, and I teach a Bob Dylan curriculum to my first graders. Training them to hear his voice by May 24th. I think when you're talking about Bob and this stale quality that he perhaps visits into his own work. When you hear other people cover his music, I think that speaks to the genius of what he's done. It's when people cover Bob, you discover new things about his.
Yes.
his
Yeah, I would, may I,
Yes.
I was in Denmark a couple of months ago, and I heard somebody sing with terrific power Dylan songs in Danish. I mean, he translated them into Danish, and it really was very, very thrilling. It was to me more thrilling in a funny way than a straight cover version. Do you know what I mean? And it was very, very extraordinary. I mean, far from poetry being what gets lost in translation, I felt art was exactly what didn't get lost in translation. That is that the extraordinary form. I mean, the Rainy Day Women was absolutely there's something in the Danish language which there are certain sound effects which are terrifically close to and yet beautifully different from what you get from the English. From it in American English.
I'd love to hear it in Yiddish.
You would. What's Danish for stoned? I want to know.
I can't remember what the Danish word is.
I'm sure there's someone. Oh, so it would be similar. Yeah.
But there'll be the verb. The verb for "they'll stone you" had a. Can you remember what that was? The drug stone.
I don't mean stone like a stone. I mean stoned like stone. Or to be have throwing stones at you. Oh, well, we know. Okay.
They stone you. You know,
Yeah.
I think part of this. Sorry, I'm talking a bit too much, or maybe much too much. But part of it would be Dylan. I think is terrifically good at knowing what dangers threaten his particular enterprise. That is, he's terrifically good at knowing that what this song is in danger is of becoming sentimental. What this song is in danger of is becoming cynical. Mm-hmm. What this song is in danger of is becoming religious instead of being religious. He's got a terrific instinct for that. So and not all artists have this. He's profligate in some ways. You know, there are a lot of songs he doesn't himself respect, and there are a lot of songs that aren't good. The Death of Emmett Till is not a good song. I mean, it's good that he wrote such a song, but it is not a good song.
There's one thing, though, that he always does do. There's one emotion that he always has, and this goes back to Amen at the end of... And he said this. Every last record signs off with good luck.
Yeah.
I hope you make it.
Lovely that. Yeah, good luck. Yeah,
I hope you make it.
Yeah.
And if you listen to any album, there is this it's like the last chord on Modern Times.
Yeah.
You know, when he's gone through the garden, but then there's this major chord at the end that is about redemption. Everything ends with good. You can make it. And I'm here with you. You know, and I don't know you, but I'm here with you. This is the redemptive side of one of the redemptive sides of Dylan's work that I find thrilling, because it's consistent and it's always there. It's generous as well. Yeah, it is true. He's a very generous. I mean, you know, the image of the guy is so misanthropic. He's not.
Have you met him?
I'm not going to go there.
It's fine.
Bid farewell and not give a damn.
Restless Farewell, but that's not the last song on the record.
It is not?
I don't think so.
Restless Farewell, yeah. Not give a damn. Not give a damn is very good because it also means not utter a curse at anybody. I mean, it's got this double sense, and that not give a damn means I don't care about it, but I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna damn it. Right. Should we open things, Matthew, please?
I think that's fine.
Okay, and if you come to the microphone, please go to the microphone is what I'm trying to say, and say who you are, because we'd like to know who you are.
I don't want to know who that is.
But I'm curious. Especially if they're young and they're attractive, you want to know, right?
Another thing, please, there's a lot of people and a lot of interest, so keep your questions or remarks brief, because that will be helpful.
So you think that? I was just curious.
Can you come up to the mic?
Come on to the mic.
We're also broadcasting.
We're broadcasting it.
The world, and there's.
And recording it.
Hi, my name's Bill Kaplan. I was at the 65 Forest Hills concert, and I'm a dentist in New York City, and I have a question about covers. Back around 69 or 70, I was listening to a college radio station in Ithaca, New York, and they were playing cuts from the White Wonder, I think the first famous bootleg album. And I thought I heard Dylan singing The Duke of Earl.
Yes.
And he really did. And do you know where I can get a hold of that? Because his phrasing was so fabulous. I must hear that again.
We'll talk later, but yes.
All right.
Yeah, we'll talk later.
It's a great song.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Peter Cohen, and This is a question. You were talking before about the care and the intentionality that went into him creating a sound before a record, and I'm very interested in his creative process as a writer. Specifically, I heard that interview with Ed Bradley where he talked about his process in the '60s was mystifying to him. That it was almost like he was inhabited by something, by a consciousness. And I know there's some songwriters like Leonard Cohen who painstakingly revise and edit their lyrics. I'm wondering what Dylan's, if you could either shed light on Dylan's approach to his craft of lyrics and editing, or if he just trusts what comes through him and lets it be.
Well, I mean, for some of the songs that I've seen, we have the evidence of it, he edits a lot. He's always editing, actually. Every song he's always editing. There's a chord. It's always up for grabs.
And in performance, he edits
He
further.
edits all the time. But if you go to the Morgan Library and you look at the collection by, is it Mr. Heckert's collection?
I don't remember. I've been there, but I don't remember.
But Heckscher, that's it. George Heckscher's collection. You'll see how he was revised. And if you listen to some of the session tapes, sometimes he goes in with a song barely half done, and it emerges in the studio. That can happen. But Visions of Johanna, however, which was originally known as Freeze Out, he had that right from the start, and it never changed. So I think it's both. And I think it's probably true for writers. Sometimes you just know you hit it, and then you just don't want to change it. But sometimes you're making it up and you're constantly changing it. Yeah. I don't think I've ever heard a version of Vision of Johanna which is not always word for word the same.
Oh, no. He examines the Nightingale's code, which is this lovely allusion to the code to a nightingale. I mean, it's very, very beautiful. I mean, it's a lovely thing.
Where does he change it?
But that line gets in, doesn't it? It's not in every version. There are changes even in that. I think they're far fewer. I think, remember it's Keats who says poetry should come as naturally as the leaves to a tree, or it better not come at all. But then Keats revises, including the lines about trees. So there's something. I mean, I think it's that to be self-conscious is good, but to be self-conscious is bad. Isn't that right? So that there's something in you which feels you must stay with an instinct. I mean, I've written about this in terms of training and instinct. I mean, a really good athlete is terrifically trained and disciplined and also has terrifically good instincts. But the point at which you think too much, remember Dylan saying you've got to program your brain so that it doesn't think too much. Right. That is paradoxical, though it's perfectly understandable. You've got to keep your brain under control, otherwise you'll be committed to too much conscious control. That in some way or other, the romantic poets who would take drugs in order to help you with it, or there are many kind of things. Tennyson used to say his own name over and over again until he didn't seem to exist anymore. I mean, you get free of yourself by just saying your own name until it becomes completely empty. And Ginsberg must have had a bad effect in some ways.
Well,
I mean, lovely, but
Kerouac revised all the time.
Is that right?
The guy who invented spontaneous prosody, he revised a lot. So I mean, but I think Christopher has it right. I mean, there's a difference between being imprisoned by your own consciousness and then, but being completely promiscuous with your consciousness. I think that there's a way in which you have to kind of walk that balance, and I think Dylan does it very well.
Matt's in neuroscience terms, they would be talking about subcortical type. In other words, the upper brain activities, which are highly reasoning and consciousness, and then the emotional or limbic. We talk a lot about these things. It's Philippides. We have to bring this up. But we're talking about more the areas of the brain where preconscious thought, unconscious thought, and poetry. We've talked a lot about poetry for Philippides in those regards too, having to do with creation of its own language and not being on the kind of cerebral cortex level, but going deep, bringing up deeper levels that exist in more conscious thinking.
Well, my question is so far away from that part of the conversation, but in any case, my name is Debbie Newman, and this is fascinating for me. I actually worked at Columbia Records for about 20 years. Starting around '73, was involved on the promotional side in some of the Dylan albums that came out in the '70s, and many years later ended up being responsible for producing the one music video that he made called Sweetheart Like You, which was filmed all night in a studio in Culver City, California. It was a more concept video. It wasn't a performance video anyway. And I'm actually now, one of the projects I worked on when I was at CBS was a documentary on John Hammond while he was still alive. Part of it included the one interview that he actually did with Bob with a parka that he never took off on. With the
John
fur.
Hammond, just so you know, was the producer that signed Dylan.
So I'm actually
Among
interested in producer A&R, one of the original sort of A&R people at Columbia Records, and pretty well-known story about his family. Anyway, I'm interested in what you know or can tell me about, one, Bob's relationship with John Hammond, and then what happened that got Tom Wilson involved, because I'm actually very interested in Tom Wilson and other things about him and how that happened. He was a young black producer in the early 60s at Columbia in those days, and how that relationship, and he produced many of his seminal albums and the transition from acoustic to electric. So if you could talk a little bit about what you know about that era and that relationship in the studio.
I wish I knew more. I know that I mean, Hammond discovers him. Is brought to Hammond's attention, and you know, Hammond was renowned for having this incredible nose for talent.
He signed Billie Holiday, right?
Well, and he did this, the Spirituals, the Swing concert in 1938. I mean, going all the way back. He signed Bruce Springsteen. At
Benny
the end,
Goodman,
you know.
Aretha Franklin.
So he is the man, all right. And so for a folk singer to get the man to back him up like that was a big deal. He describes him very interestingly in Chronicles as this sort of almost a Damon Runyon-like character, which is, you know, John Hammond is not really that at all. So he had a different impression of him than I might have had. But why Tom Wilson came in for the second record, I just don't know the answer to that.
Well, I had read that Albert Grossman somehow had gotten John Hammond like thrown off the project and brought in this new young producer, Tom Wilson, but you don't. Okay.
You could find out. And what's interesting to me was how Wilson got canned. In the middle, you know, they cut Like a Rolling Stone with Wilson. And in fact, on the 45, I think it actually says produced by Tom Wilson. But then he's off the project, and they bring in Bob Johnston from Nashville. And that's, you know, going to lead in a wholly different direction than where Tom would have taken him. So that very much had to do with behind-the-scenes Grossman manipulating things. And they wanted to get somebody who was more rock and roll-y.
But Tom Wilson was a jazz producer.
Well, that's right.
It was a jazz, and also did some of Garfunkel's early records and stuff like that.
Yeah, but this is the difference, though. I mean, Wilson said, in fact, you know, he's listening to John Coltrane, and he says, you know, these folk people are just a drag. And then he listened to Dylan, and he said, wait a minute, there's something here that's new, that's interesting, that's possible. But if you listen to his Simon and Garfunkel records, you can see where things might have gone. That's not where the sound that they wanted, and that sound was going to go. But the curious is that he did do Like a Rolling Stone, and Like a Rolling Stone is, you know, is the Big Bang in many ways. So who knows?
Thank you.
I'm Michael Sachs, and sort of to go back to Matthew's initial remarks comparing Dylan and Paul Simon, really the first and only time I saw Dylan live was in 1999, I believe, at a concert when he was touring with Paul Simon at Jones Beach. And one of the things they did as part of that, and it was really, really thrilling, is to hear the two of them jamming together on the music they had grown up with, the original rock and roll songs. Little Richard, Buddy Holly was extraordinary. But one thing that I would like to hear more about, and it really follows in on something Professor Willen said, is really what an extraordinary, serious musician he is. Because I think one of the things that have always struck me, and it certainly has on his latest albums like Modern Times, are the different musical lines that come into his record, being very, very different, but drawing from so many roots, whether it's folk, jazz, blues, it's all there, and it's there repeatedly. And that those historical musical references are, to me, probably as profound, but an integral part of his comments on the human condition, small and large. So,
yeah, I think, well, if you listen to Theme Time Radio Hour, I mean, which is his bringing to the public the music that's out there, you'll see that he is an incredible scholar of the music. Right. I don't know if he knows the name of every label that things appeared on. Maybe that's fed to him. But nevertheless, he knows the music extremely well. I think that that's something that he has let out more and more as he's gotten older.
Yeah.
I think that it's not something that he would have done as much of before. What else do I want to say? I mean, look, he can take a song like Nettie Moore, which I think is the best song on Modern Times. And here's a song that, you know, if Stephen Foster didn't write it, he could have written the melody, but he didn't. So again, he inhabits a style as well as a place, as well as a time. And then I mean, half the lyrics come from from Papa Charlie Jackson. I mean, it's from all over the place. So that he is, but he brings it all together as something completely different. You know, it's not any one of those things. I mean, if he does Duke of Earl, it's not going to be Earl Chandler. It's going to be something else.
I'd want to say I don't think it's completely different. You see, I mean, I understand. I mean, I think it's natural to say that.
You're right. I understand.
I mean, what's lovely is that it's different. It's like a metaphor. It's a combination of similitude and dissimilitude. It's like a good translation. Isn't that right? I mean, he's taken it, he's translated it. It asks repeatedly to be seen against the ground of the previous. I mean, if he sings Barbara Allen, it asks to be heard against the ground of how it had been sung. And of course, by now, his own songs ask to be heard against the ground of how they were once sung. They're wonderfully available in that way. I mean, that is, The Times They Are Changing is a song that has changed partly because you hear it against the ground of how he once sang. He sang it as a young man when he was a young man, and he sings it like a great-grandfather now. That is, your sons and your daughters are beyond your command. There's a different, is voiced by him differently when he was one of the sons as against the one of the, I mean, he's moved on. So I think, I mean, so there's completely different seems to me to
I think you're right.
overstate
I think you're absolutely right. I think you're absolutely right. It's enough of the similarities there, but it's not a cover version of a Stephen Foster song. It's something that he has done something to.
Well, and just one comment on people covering Dylan. I just happened to begin listening again to Guns N' Roses doing Knocking on Heaven's Door. And what you get there when you listen to it is both the sense of it being so much of a Dylan song and all of the important musical emphases are there, and then increased, presumably by their own inspiration that they took from Dylan and bring forward. But again, that's a very, very compelling performance.
He's very against, just forgive me 1 second, he's very against the brand new. It's not just in leather, skin, pillbox hat. He doesn't like anything that's brand new. And Working Man's Blues uses it terrifically well about brand new suit and so on. Uses it. I mean, new is fine. Brand new is not fine. And you're even kidding yourself if you suppose you could come up with something brand new. Right. Poetry has its own language. No, it doesn't. It has the same. It has the language of prose, and it has a different system of punctuation. I'm sorry, please. You get.
Well, I think the gentleman was first.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No. Go ahead, please. I wanted to go back to something the two of you disagreed on the impact of Just Like a Woman. And I'm a psychoanalyst who first heard Dylan at Newport in '63. It seems like anger would explain the link between your two disagreements. He was a train wreck, he was broken up, and he was angry. So he spits out his anger. Also, in Time Out of Mind, I heard Al Jolson trying to get to heaven before they closed the door. If you listen to Al Jolson, which I happened to as a kid, and I actually saw him, I'm wondering if you've heard this. He takes Jolson's phrasing, who's the ultimate. Jolson took vaudeville and moved it, minstrel and moved it into vaudeville. He was black-faced. Dylan on Rolling Thunder was white-faced. And I just wonder if you had heard Jolson in any other context of Dylan's singing.
I haven't. I'm going to go back and listen again, but I know that that music of the 20s and 30s Jolson, Eddie Cantor, The Last of the Minstrels. He actually has an album called The Last of the Minstrels. It's Georgie Jessel, where he's in blackface. They're all Jewish too, which is important. It's not unimportant. It does show up I know that he is familiar with all of that and listens to it very, very carefully. And it's part of what's in there. But I didn't notice it on that record. I didn't notice it on that cut of that record, so I'll go back and listen much more carefully.
Well, and that's the beauty of his music. I mean, if we had a Phil Schaap here, I don't know if he cares about Bob Dylan, but I'm sure he could listen very closely to a lot of Dylan and hear those echoes.
He could tell you, not only that, he'd tell you exactly what day and what second and what minute was recorded, and who was at the bathroom at the time and came back was on the third cut. But I love you, Phil.
Well, I think I'm so sorry.
No.
I was just going to say, I think your point about anger is very, very good.
Yes.
Partly because of, there's a wonderful poem by Stevie Smith in which it's about anger's freeing power. It's rather frightening. It's a frightening thought. Anger's freeing power. She wishes that we could be freed by things other than anger. It'd be much better if there were other things that could liberate us, but anger's free. So I think you're right. He's liberated from certain kinds of spitefulness by anger. I mean, anger is not actually spiteful. I mean, it's like Dr. Johnson. Dr. Johnson liked a good hater. He thought the trouble with most people is they don't admit to hatred and so on. But that would bridge something of the disagreement about the song.
It would.
Which isn't very deep anyway.
Not profound.
Sorry.
My name is Shiv Sikri. I just wanted to make a comment or observation about his affinity to 19th century America. In the Scorsese documentary, it was interesting when he talks about first hearing early folk records and how he felt that he related to those things so clearly, and that he felt that he'd been born at the wrong time, in the wrong family, and so forth. But also, I think it was very interesting when Gregory Peck was giving, or was talking about him at the Kennedy Awards some years ago, and Gregory Peck talked about when he was growing up, as a child, he would go to the Veteran Day marches, and there would be Civil War soldiers who were still among the survivors, and there was something about Dylan's voice, the readiness, and somehow that was exactly the right description, that reminded him of those people from that different era. All I'm trying to say is that there's something very authentic about that connection that was transparent to Gregory Peck, and I don't think it's contrived in any way. It feels very real.
Gregory Peck could also inhabit the past extremely well when he wanted.
Yes, that's true.
So he may have been noticing something about a kindred spirit as an actor and as a writer. But yes, I mean, there. In Chronicles, he talks about how, if you had asked him what the latest thing was, well, President McKinley's just been shot. He's been shot down in Zolgachev. He would live in those songs. He would inhabit the religiosity, the sentiment. It's in the songs, and the songs could take him to a place that was not Hibbing, Minnesota. He also talks in the Scorsese movie about when they moved him to the house in Hibbing, and there was this record player, right, an old big cabinet record player. And somebody had left something behind. They forget, sometimes you leave your CD in your car, and you have to go back and get it. Well, someone had left the record behind, and it was the Stanley Brothers singing "Drifting Too Far from the Shore." And so he put on that record because he was 7 or 8 years old, whatever it was, and then he was transferred. He knew he was somewhere else.
Right.
Now that's not a 19th century song, although if you listen to the Stanley Brothers, you might as well be in the 19th century.
It connects with that period.
Correct.
Right.
So he understood that, and that was. If there's an epiphany in the young Bob Dylan's life, that was it.
Right.
So yes, but hearing that and feeling, I feel that, but I can't do that.
Right. Right.
I want to be able to do it.
Right.
But I can't.
Yeah.
And that's where the artist comes in. He's just a genius, and I'm not.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the thing about the complaints about appropriations, I think, are just silly, because what an artist does is they'll absorb and relate to these things and transform it in magical ways, and to sort of nitpick about.
I will be a little nitpicky on the appropriation thing, though. Here's where I get a little nitpicky myself. Is only that there are some, and you hear it on Together Through Life. He credits one tune to Willie Dixon, which is right. I mean, he takes a Willie Dixon song, he takes a Muddy Waters song. But there are also songs on there that he might have been able to, he ought to be able to find a way to give more credit to. I don't know the ins and outs of copyright and all of the rest of it. I mean, most of it's PD, doesn't matter. But there are a couple of little examples where I wish he might have been able to say more. He does say on the second of the acoustic records, he has these sort of zany, wonderful, I love them, these liner notes that he writes about each song. Isn't that almost wonderful? I mean, he just goes on and on about them. But he gives credit where credit is due. This is a Blind Willie McTell song. This is a the Memphis Mini song. I mean, he'll say that, and he's very good at it. So I wish he'd do more of it actually, rather than less.
I was just curious if you've seen the small spiral diary in which he wrote "Blood on the Tracks."
I haven't seen it. No.
Okay, it's also in the Heckscher collection.
Yeah, I know it's there, and I haven't seen it.
But it's one of those 29-cent Woolworth spiral things, and it's extraordinary to see because he writes an entire song on just a tiny sheet, and it's almost like his voice because it's it has a certain vibration, yet it's very controlled and very clear at the same time, and you can almost hear the song in just the way he shapes all the letters. It's kind of amazing.
It's interesting. Those were written in the wintertime, and it was in Minnesota, and it was a lot of snow on the ground. So he wasn't talking to a lot of people, I suspect. And I suspect he was hearing his own voice, which he was hearing quite well. I suspect he hears his own voice very well. So it may have something to do with the conditions of that particular time.
We've had a number of questions from the internet, most of which have to do with his...
Come on up, yes. Okay.
Oh, sure.
Excuse me, I didn't mean it. It's just that...
That's fine.
Let's go live.
My name is Bob. It's more of a comment than a question. I was at Bethel during the summer for the performance, and what I never was struck before, I've been at a few concerts, the way that he used the staging. I don't know if he did it or whoever did it, but it was shamanic. It was just like, he had all this mylar, and it was in the dark, and they put the lights off between each song, and they put them on very intense. It was like going into your retinals. It was like really permeating you. And I wonder, and then he had this plantation hat on, and he had these kind of props that he uses, and he posed himself in like a frozen pose in different ways. And it was really mesmerizing. And I wonder if you guys know more about how he puts himself into his persona. Does he think he has one, or is he creating one constantly?
Of course he has a persona. Every performer has a
Well,
persona.
I actually saw that show at the year before at Bethel when it poured down rain. And it was the grand opening of the new Woodstock, and he actually made a comment. One of the things he does when he performs is he barely talks to the audience, if at all. He doesn't acknowledge them except for, the Dylan websites go crazy when he makes eye contact with somebody. He's a song and dance man.
There's actually a section in one of these sites that's called Bop Talk, and they transcribe every time he says something like, no, here's my band, right? And now they'll quote it. It's very odd. But I mean, look, the shamanic quality, sure. I mean, but that goes back to Rolling Thunder Revue. I mean, that kind of performance and Jacques Levy. But he's always been very aware of stagecraft. Shelton took him to hear the Clancy Brothers, to learn how to be better on stage, and how to do that. And this is a story that I've heard from the Clancy Brothers. So he's very aware of all of that, of how he's appearing on stage and what he's doing. And I don't think the costumes are, they're not coincidental.
We have another question.
My name is Mary Ellen, and I was wondering if, you say that he had the feeling that while he was growing up that he was born into the wrong family, the wrong place, and so on. But on the other hand, he was born there. And you know a lot more about his background than I do. What is there about his background that speaks to his art and to the Bob Dylan that we know? I mean, he didn't come from, he was born there. So.
Sure. Well, there's some obvious ways. I mean, North Country Blues is about the town that he grew up in. Sorry, North Country Blues is an album, a song off of, I forget which, the second or third album. I can't remember. Third. It's all about Hibbing, and it's all about a certain kind of America that was disappearing, a certain kind of work that was disappearing. It was all being shipped to South America. All of these commentaries, a lot of his politics actually, to the extent that the politics are there, and there's always politics there somewhere. A lot of that was formed in Hibbing, which was actually a much more, what should we say, rousing, political environment than people remember. There were a lot of, in the Iron Range itself, it was a deeply political area, and you couldn't have avoided that. So that's part of what I think.
And his family, was there some artistic interest in his family, or?
Not that I know.
No one knows.
I mean, his father worked for Standard Oil as a manager, and then got polio, and then was basically taken up to Hibbing by his family, where they had an appliance store, electrical appliance store, and they set him up. His mother was very charismatic. It's like a lot of Jewish families. I mean, the father is sort of, the mother's this, outgoing, wonderful person that everybody loved. But I don't know that there was any music in any of that at all.
Yeah. I think it's always tricky, isn't it? Because aren't parents just as counterproductive as productive? And aren't places just as counterproductive? If you're the son of a bishop, you may be a curate or you may be an atheist. If you live in the home counties in England in middle class amplitude, you may kind of become some wanderer across the Far East in search of drugs and truth. I mean, it seems to me you never know how that sort of thing is going to work out. I mean, I was very touched by what you said about your father, so I'll give you my story about my father. My father said to me near the end of his life that he had never heard me give a talk. I said, well, I'm coming down to Brighton to the university, and please come over if you would like to. I saw him about once a year. I'd been talking about a quarter of an hour about Tennyson's manuscripts, and Dad came, and he was wearing a deerstalker hat, which he had never worn before, and he had grown a beard. So I felt very like a parent looking at a son rather than the other way around. Right. And he came and he sat down a little way in, and then after about 20 minutes, when I'm still talking about it in memoriam, he did this. Whoops. And I said, my father wants to go to the lavatory, could you tell me where the lavatory is? So the man running it said it's down the hall. So I said, it's down the hall. Dad went down the hall, came back in, sat down for another 10 minutes, came down the front and said, last bus, got to go. Now, was this about literary criticism? You now have to go like this, and that nobody pulls the lavatory chain any longer, you just turn the lavatory handle. Now, what the influence on the young Ricks of this happening? I wrote a book about embarrassment. I didn't deliberately write a book about it. Do you see what I mean? I just thought, if you told me that Dad would come to a talk of mine and in the middle of it get up and do this thing, but I think we just never know. We never know what, isn't that right? You just think, and of course, parents are formed by their children. It's not true that it just goes one way. I mean, you are repeatedly changed by your children. Yeah. I agree that most of the influences are, but you just see people being changed by their children. Tennyson was changed by his son Hallam. As soon as Hallam was 15 years old, he profoundly changed his father. In many ways for the better. So I think it's a sort of unanswerable question, except by really in-depth, or except by the psychoanalyst who knows about anger. You'd be able to help us with that.
We have another question right here.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to say that, we were talking earlier about an arc in his career, and you were kind of being rightfully hesitant. I mean, one thing for me personally is that I've found he always has something to teach me. And that his passions and his enthusiasm and his amazing knowledge about music and about artists, much like, and I know this will titillate Christopher, much like Eliot's essays on other artists are very revealing about his own art. And if you listen to Theme Time Radio Hour, there's hundreds of artists that you would, I would never be turned on to without Dylan kind of pointing me to them. Absolutely. And they're amazing, they're great, and you don't hear them anywhere. And yet, so many of his kind of comments and the styles, they've helped me re-understand what he was doing, what he was about. And I think it's amazing as an artist that he's so able to siphon into something original. And at the same time, go back, listen to Woody Guthrie, listen to Louis Armstrong, listen to, about 300 other people that you want to think of. And these last 3 albums, we've been talking about Crosby, but I see from kind of Love and Theft on as kind of under Crosby's banner, as well as Charlie Poole on Modern Times. And I think it's just amazing. So I guess if I have to put this into a question, I wanted to know what artists or things has Dylan turned you guys on to that you might not have been able to appreciate without him?
That's a good one. You want to go first.
I like
this
doing
time.
this.
I know, but I like you to go first this time.
I don't listen enough to theme time radio. I value it very, very highly, partly because it seems to me repeatedly not to be subverting, because that's just rubbish, but to be having jokes at the expense of the people who believe too much in things like theme time radio. So if I just give a little example, on the cover of this book, there's Dylan with a cigarette in his mouth. Exactly the same photograph is used for the CD for No Direction Home, but they've taken the cigarette out of his mouth.
Really?
That's the nicotine police. And I don't smoke, I've never smoked, never had a cigarette in my mouth. My brother was beaten to a pulp at school for smoking. Deterrence works, but not on the person that you beat to a pulp. It works on the younger brother. Now, so what's Dylan going to do about smoking? What he does is, at the one on coffee, half of the songs are about smoking. Because you can't. So there's a lovely way in which you get round the nicotine police by calling it coffee and having it be repeatedly about the smoke rings, not just of minds, but of lungs, and so on, smoke rings of your lungs. Those are the ones to worry about, I think.
I wish he'd stop smoking, but never mind.
Yeah, well, I wish he would too.
Never mind.
Should we send him a petition? Should we say 75 people would like you, A, to give up smoking, and B, to take off that horrible thin stipple? No, we don't do that. Hurt his feelings. But I don't know. But
well, I mean, lots. I mean, it's not so much. I know a lot of the stuff that he's referring to, but I listened to it again. I mean, I don't think I liked not Charlie Poole, but Charlie Patton anywhere near as much as after he's sending me back to Charlie Patton. I mean, a lot of Charlie Patton's hard to take the first time through. It's just it's rough. It's very rough. John Hurt, there's a sweet songster style, right? Everybody likes John Hurt. He's so smiley, he's so wonderful. Charlie Patton's gonna kill you. I mean, that's the kind of thing that might happen when you hear a Charlie Patton song. It might slay you. But he's done a lot of that. I mean, Charlie Patton's probably the best example recently. And then there's Eddie Duchin. I mean, I was not a big Eddie Duchin fan, but he did some Eddie Duchin stuff. The 30s and 40s stuff, a lot of that skipped by me. It's weird. When I was in college 30, 40 years ago, we were listening to the Grateful Dead and to Bob Dylan and to that music. And now, 40 years later, as a college professor, the first day of spring, when the windows go open, what do I hear but Sugar Magnolia and, Like a Rolling Stone? It's the same damn music that we grew up on. When we were in college, we did not listen to Frank Sinatra. We did not listen to Bing Crosby. We thought that was all dead, right? So what he's done, and this is funny, I mean, he's brought that all back to me in my, middle age. Stuff that I had rejected as, impossible. In the wee small hours of the morning, it'll break your heart. I mean, if he doesn't, you're heartless. You don't have a heart to break. So he brought me back to that. To that stuff. So I owe him a lot.
We only have a few more minutes. Do you want to just let some of the internet questions be...
Well, a lot of the internet questions seem to revolve around the stuff that we've touched on a lot.
Okay.
Dylan's relationship to religion, and someone asked if Christmas in the Heart is his religion. One way I thought of addressing this question is if either of you have any thoughts about Infidels, which you had alluded to as a very interesting album. It's one of my favorite albums, and it marks a turn in his work, I think.
How so?
Well, historically, I mean, it's thought of as a place where he moves from purely religious work towards a more secular.
Well, I think he's already in transition with before that. Actually,
that's
I think the transition was there in Shot of Love, and so. Well, one of the things about Infidels is the songs that didn't make it.
Yes, right.
The best song on Infidels is not on the album, which is Blind Willie McTell, which I think is maybe the best song they wrote in the 80s. Would you say that, Christopher? I mean,
I like the album very much, but I think Blind Willie McTell is a greater song. I mean, I don't necessarily believe in always thinking it's a sort of knockout tournament. 4 songs go through.
I understand.
You know what I mean? So that I'm not. But Blind Willie. Blind Man's Tale is like Series of Dreams. It's an extraordinary aberration of judgment by him in a way, but with good cause. I mean, you could see the way in which Series of Dreams wouldn't quite work. Similarly with Mary and the Soldier, isn't that right? I mean, one of the very best things on Telltale Signs should have gone out with Well Gone Wrong or Good As I've Been To You,
Right.
whichever it could have been on with that. So he is profligate, isn't he? He's like a great Victorian poet writing, or a great romantic, but writing in a way much too much. It's the opposite of Houseman, or Jane Austen. I mean, you only write the things that will get through. You don't, and so on. Right. But there's something in him which is very magnanimous and very profligate, really. Do you see what I'm...
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. It's just that that was a great song that people kept trying to get him to put out.
Yes,
put out.
Yeah.
It didn't happen for a long time.
Yeah.
And it had to do, he said it never quite sounded right, and the mix wasn't correct, and didn't quite happen.
Yeah.
But as a piece of, and in fact, I mean, we realize it's a masterpiece after the fact. I mean, and it's exactly that instrumentation. I mean, it's exactly that.
Yeah.
He's just running through the song with Mark Knopfler to try and see what it sounds like again.
Right, yeah.
And it turns out that in a kind of what we would take to be a run through is just a masterpiece, I think. That album, though, I mean, if other things on it, yes, he is getting up ahead of steam with that record. The problem was that the head of steam didn't really catch up until a decade later, because then things kind of, then I think the things don't work out. I wish he'd put out Blonde Willie until then; it would have been better.
One thing I've heard throughout this whole conversation, and the last guy who was at the podium really underscored it for me, is this issue of Dylan's view of time. You know, because we live in such a profoundly ahistorical period. And in the arts, too, in almost all the arts, there is an ahistoricism that is really deadly, and particularly in popular music. And so it's, you know, I always ask myself, what is it about Dylan that has made him so lasting, so universally appealing? And I think that his willingness to situate himself so broadly in sort of human experience, you know, not just in the present, is an amazing distinction that it's a shame that more artists don't share.
Well, I think the historical element is important to all of that. I mean, it's not just the breadth and the universalism, that's important, but I think that especially in the arts today, there is such a junking. I'm going to give a plug to my son, if I may. May I give a plug to my son?
Absolutely.
My son has an excellent website, which everyone should check into, called Old Masters, New Perspectives. And what he tries to do is to understand and try to undercut the ahistoricism of understanding art, the ahistoricism of loving art these days. And he wants to try and do something different with all of that. Bob Dylan does that on a scale that's monumental. But you know, you have to know something. He's a very smart guy, and he's read a lot.
You have to study, which so few artists do anymore.
Exactly. Yeah, you really do. And you know, I study and it comes out. Look, he studies and it becomes genius. But he does the two. You can't just be a genius without that study, and he's got it.
But yeah, I'd add a couple of things. One is, I mean, Tennyson said, "Knowledge comes, but wisdom lingers."
Yes.
And then information comes, but knowledge lingers. Data come. But information, I mean, what's happened is that, you know, data is equated with information, which is equated with knowledge, which is equated, and so on. Now, I think Dylan has profound intuitions. He knows that the opposite of old in Old Masters is not only new, but young. Yes. He has always been aware that the word old is different from the word new, because the word old has a quite other opposite to it. You know, it has two antonyms, and young is just as important an antonym as new. So that gives you a triangle, and it puts new in a different position from old, because the opposite of old, you know, opens up as these. So repeatedly, the songs are about age and aging. Right from the very beginning, he's doing that. Right from the very beginning, he's learned from Eliot that when you're young, it's a good time to say, I grow old. I grow up the trousers. The bottom of my trousers roll. So I think that would be part of it. I mean, I agree. I think that he's very, very wise. I think he's really wise. He's committed follies of the kind that Blake sort of commits and recommends, but you know, in his wisdom. Do you know what I mean? But I think that you're right. It's very, I don't know about there not being any history. Is it true? It's just that when you get older, you have more history because you just live longer. I mean, people say it's terrible that my students don't know such and such. Do you know what I mean? Why should they know it? It happened long before they were born.
I think that's a good place to end it.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yes. Books for sale. There are books for sale over there.
Books for sale, and please tell your friends. We've got lots more programs. This program will be available on our video archive, I think, by the end of the week.
Okay.
And the conversation continues.